Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the 32nd chapter in the book of Job. And the book of Job is classified as a theodicy, which explores the relationship of suffering to the righteous. And the entire book is prompted by a challenge from the adversary when the adversary points with pride to the earth in its sin-stained condition. Elohim, or Yahweh, points to his servant Job, who was perfect and upright. Satan accuses him of having a commercial conception of worship and argues that he was only blessed inasmuch as he was prosperous, and only blessed Yahweh inasmuch as he prospered him, and invites the challenge to Yahweh to remove all of his physical health, his worldly material items, and his family members' lives. And he says that he will curse him. And then the remainder of the narrative consists of a dialogue between Job and primarily three comforters who are less than comforting, and they're trying to make sense of it all. And Job is perplexed because none of them are privy to the discussion in the throne room of heavy, which prompted the whole suffering. And now Elihu spans the range of the 32nd to the 37th chapter, and he is the one who speaks before the dramatic intervention of Yahweh. And what we have to understand is that not every item of information expressed by the comforters and dialogue participants are strictly speaking true, yet we have no reason to doubt their honest intentions. Their problem was a lot of them, in a lot of ways and in a lot of places, clung to an archaic and simplistic theology whereby one could not suffer unless they had sinned. And Elihu is in a lot of ways wiser, even though he's older than his counterparts, and with the exception of Job, he comes nearest to the truth, or at least says more true things. So the opening verse reads, "Then these three men ceased to answer Job, because he was righteous in his own eyes." These three men are Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, who formed the collective exchange of dialogues, and they had had enough. They gave up because Job, his sin, now he had not suffered because he sinned, but he did sin in his suffering. He essentially exalted himself to the sin of self-righteousness, and that forms the connection to the next verse, which reads, "And the wrath of Elihu, son of Barachel, the Buzite, of the clan of Ram, burned against Job. His wrath burned because he justified himself rather than Elohim." So Job, he couldn't understand why he did this, and he was insisting that he maintained his integrity and his righteousness and his faith. And in his defense, even though the adversary was granted permission by Yahweh to take every item, external item, the two things he could not take was his integrity and his faith. But there is some deficiency in that he implicitly accused Yahweh of injustice because his suffering was not completely merited, but it was for a wiser purpose of proving the adversary that his servant would be vindicated. "And against his three friends his wrath burned, because they had found no answer, and pronounced Elohim wicked." So his wrath and anger is in a twofold direction. One, between the nature of Job. Job's defense was essentially self-righteous and aggrandizing, and exalted himself at the expense of Elohim. And the three friends were unable to pinpoint the precise nature of the cause of the effect. And I guess at some point they pronounced Elohim wicked, although they never explicitly said those words. They've implicitly indicated it throughout various junctures we can imagine in the antecedent chapters. "And because they were years older than he, Elihu had waited to speak to Job." So he's mindful of the due deference and the protocol to let the elders speak before, because elders are generally wiser and more experienced. And a lot of Job's three comforters, the preceding comforters, spoke from the vantage point of experience, but the problem is that experience offers a limited worldview or a limited view of what can be grasped. But Elihu asserts a superior form of revelation in that he claims to be moved by the Spirit, as we will read. And And when Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these 3 men, his wrath burned. And Elihu, son of Bachael, the Buzite, responded and said, I am young in years, and you are aged. Therefore I was afraid to let you know my opinion. So once more he's giving them the due deference of his elders. He lets them speak, but even though they're silenced and they have nothing more to say, that's when he deems it inappropriate to extent to intervene. And he wasn't originally visiting Job for the period of 7 days in the initial 2nd chapter, so he emerges on the scene somewhere between now and then. And they spent a whole 7 days in silence just trying to assess it before they even formulated their thoughts on the matter. So you can't, even though a lot of their insights were technically speaking wrong, a lot of them are right and self-evident, but you cannot accuse them of not having entered into any reflection before offering their opinions. I said, days should speak, and many years should teach wisdom. But truly it is the spirit in man and the breath of El Shaddai that gives him understanding. So he's saying that he is acknowledging the fact that they are more experienced men, but once more he asserts the superior form of revelation. El Shaddai translates as God Almighty. It is more frequently referenced in the book of Job than anywhere else, but he was known as such throughout the book of Genesis and elsewhere throughout the scriptures. But the spirit is a superior form of revelation, and the breath of El Shaddai that gives not only life. We read that he breathed the breath of life into Adam in Genesis 2:7, but also understanding. The multitude are not wise, nor do the aged understand justice. So the first evidence is self-evident. By law of nature, the majority of human beings are simply stupid. There's really no kinder way to put it. It's true in any culture at any time, but and that may be true for the majority of elderly people, but generally speaking, they have greater understanding of justice and the dynamics than the younger. But he wasn't shy to point out what he saw as a deficiency in their conception and understanding of justice. Therefore, I have said, listen to me. Let me also make my opinion known to you. So once more, he's entering into this dialogue only after they had said their pieces and said all they had to say and all they wanted to say and all they could say. So he was reflecting the entire time. He was taking careful mental notes, and a lot of the insights, even though at certain points he does claim to bring original insights, a lot of his expressions are essentially regurgitated from what was said earlier. Look, I waited for your words. I listened to your reasoning while you searched out what to say. Once more, he's giving the situation the proper amount of reflection and analysis. He does not say what he says on the whim, but after careful observation and much in response to what they had expressed in the antecedent chapters. And I paid close attention to you. But look, not one of you proved Job wrong, nor answered his words. So he's accusing them of, he's implying that Job was wrong, as he made plain in the second verse, and he's accusing them of offering inferior arguments which could not prove the point he was in implicit agreement with, that Job was wrong. And Elihu had a greater understanding of the nature of sin or suffering in the relation to the righteous. Remember, this is a theodicy, and he essentially implies, maybe not in this chapter, that Job did not suffer because he sinned, but he sinned in his suffering, and suffering he elsewhere elevates to a form of revelation. Yahweh often speaks to us in our pains and often uses pain to draw us closer to him, and there is remedial value and educational value in the experience of suffering. To paraphrase the 19th century preacher Charles Spurgeon, the path of sorrow, and that path alone leads to the land where sorrow is unknown. Lest you say, we have found wisdom, it is El that drives him away, not man. Now he has not ordered words against me, so I would not answer him with your words. So once more, he's evaluating the nature of their responses and the character thereof, and is not shy to express that their answers and responses were seemingly lacking, and that it failed to accomplish its stated objective, which was to prove that Job was not as righteous as he proclaimed, though he was identified as a perfect man, which should not be. He wasn't perfect in the absolute sense, but he is identified as such in the 8th verse of the 1st chapter and a few other locations in the book. They have broken down, they have not answered again. Words have departed from them. So not only is he aware that they are bereft of, even after all they say, they are bereft of extra words, but he is aware that they are aware. They had came to an essential standstill and an intellectual inertia. They had said all that they could say, all that they wanted to say, and they had failed to prove the point, which was their stated objective. And I have waited, but they do not speak, because they have stood still. They answered no more. So once more, he's stating the fact that he was patient in saying that all he needed to say. He was deferential to his elders, and he speaks an uninterrupted continuum for the next 5 chapters until Yahweh dramatically intervenes and sets the record straight. And spoiler alert, as we read, he does vindicate Job above his friends who he essentially accuses them of speaking of items which they knew not. Let me answer on my part. Let me also make my opinion known. So equality demands that he be afforded the same right to speak as those who spoke before him, and he is, as always, deferential to the elders and respective of their rank and age to let them go first. But having heard all that he heard, he is overwhelmed by, and he has much to say in response to them, and he does continue the it is a dialogue, but he assumes the longest monologic portion of this dialogue, and he is not, unlike the 3 comforters, answered by Job in response, but after the 37th chapter, in the 38th, Yahweh dramatically intervenes and sets the record straight. For I am filled with words, the spirit within me presses him. So we get a sense of the overwhelmingness of his desire to speak. He has much to say, and he once more claims that the Spirit is directing him what to say, and there is no substitute for the Spirit when speaking on theology. And it is constant prayer, not only before I do these videos, I always, in one form or another, ask for the Spirit to visit me. The words are different every time, but it is simply impossible to understand the things of this which pertain to the Spirit without the Spirit's guidance and enabling ability. See within me, it is like wine in open. It shall burst like new wineskins. Now, wineskins were the contraption through which wines were contained and held, and we read of the most famous reference in the New Testament when the Savior compares the archaic and not completely obsolete, but Jewish system as incompetent to hold the newness of his good news, and that can be found in Matthew 9:17, also in Luke and Mark, I believe, so it spans the range of the synoptics. Let me speak so that I find relief. Let me open my lips and answer. So he's already speaking at this point, but he is mindful of manners and asking them, even though he's already started to speak and will continue to speak for some time, to allow him to speak what's on his mind. He does have a lot to say, and a lot of it is very valid, and some of it is not, strictly speaking, completely correct. Please let me not show partiality to anyone, nor let me flatter any man. So impartiality, he doesn't have a dog in the fight between Job and his comforters, erroneously named or inaccurately named, at least in most parts, but as he makes plain in the second and third verses, he's disappointed with and, in fact, angry at both. And flattery is deceptive, and the wounds of a friend are more useful than the lips of the deceiver, to paraphrase a sentiment expressed in a few locations throughout Proverbs. So flattery is often a deceptive tool which tells people what they want to hear rather than what they need to know. For I do not know how to flatter, lest my Maker should soon take me away. So there is something inherently and implicitly sinful in flattery, and he acknowledges that if he does flatter, then he makes an absolute confident assurance that he has no right to continue to exist, and that's an admitted extremity. Flattery is a sin to which we are, all of us, in various ways and invariably at certain locations and situations, guilty of. But that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. Tune in next time. Bye-bye.